The apocalypse has a bit of a perception problem. It doesn't have to be seen as such a bad thing. There's no more traffic regulations. You get to spend more time outdoors, enjoying nature. Petrol is free. You can steal as much as you like. There are lots of new, interesting people to meet. And lots of opportunities for invigorating physical exercise. Welcome to Days Gone on PC. Let's make the apocalypse great again. Days Gone is a curious phenomenon and in many ways tells a variety of stories about the failings of the video game industry and especially mainstream video game journalism. It's a remarkably solid post-apocalyptical open world game, which is generally very well liked by the people who buy it and play it, but was also largely shafted and let down by mainstream reviewers. In some ways, Days Gone is the exact polar opposite of The Last of Us 2. They are both brutal post-collapse video games where the player tries to survive an end-of-day scenario, curiously published by the same company within 12 months of each other. Only The Last of Us 2 is a self-indulgent identity politics shitshow, loved and lauded by the mainstream media, but largely despised by gamers with decent taste, half an ounce of common sense and a disliking for self-righteous social justice showboating, which comes at the expense of the consumer. Whilst Days Gone, on the other hand, is a gritty, semi-realistic exploration of humanity, incredibly well liked by the people who actually spent time playing it, and generally shat on by the woke mainstream media. I would go as far as to say that this is one of the most underrated games I've played in a long while, and ample evidence that, frankly, mainstream video game journalism as an industry is widely incompetent, frankly redundant, and more concerned with politics than video games. First released as a PlayStation exclusive in April 2019 and then on PC in May 2021, it generally racks up a positive player score of around 95%. That's quite phenomenal for a game that has generally been shit on by the mainstream media and which I only reviewed because channel supporters kept asking me about the game Days Gone. The game was developed by Bend Studios, Oregon, the artists formerly known as Blank, Berlin & Co. Incorporated, and Eidic Incorporated. They are famous for Bubsy 3D on PlayStation 1, Siphon Filter games, some PS Vita games, and fuck all else. Bend Studios Oregon is not, let's face it, an industry Goliath, and has zero pedigree for making such a high calibre of game, and hasn't actually made a full-blown console or PC game in a decade. Needless to say, the game was published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. They are famous for being bastards, abusing copyright and DMCA procedures to suppress bad news about The Last of Us 2, being hypocrites by banning boobs and cartoon nudes in hentai games, then letting Naughty Dog Studio include a whole explicit hate fuck in their woke game. Oh, and thanks to a mate of mine tipping me off about this, Sony is also guilty of covertly putting DRM software on your music CDs back in the day, which uploaded malicious software to your PC without your knowledge or permission in an attempt to end music piracy. I'm pretty sure they lost that battle on all fronts. So yeah, it's a low-key developer and an arsehole publisher. Before we bust open the bonesaw and lift the skull cap off of Days Gone on PC, I should qualify that I'm playing this on a mid-range PC. Appropriately with mid-range skills. I decided to play on normal difficulty because I wanted to advance the main plot at a relatively gentle pace and not risk getting bogged down by anything that might be described as a skill check. I would, however, note that I will be playing the game through again on a much harder difficulty setting, and that's a compliment right there. I should also be honest about my bias. I completely obsess about post-apocalyptical video games, especially survival games, so Days Gone has my name slathered all over it. I'm also a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica. This one. Not that one. So yeah, I was a fan of Sam Witwer long before I knowingly encountered him in a video game. I mean, I'm not in love with him. I'm not going to write him a poem or give him a free suck job or anything. I am simply being upfront about my biases in the interests of transparency. But if I did write Sam Witwer a love poem, it would no doubt be fucking excellent. Functionality and fuckery. I will say now, I will be doing a lot of griping about Days Gone. Basically, it's one of those games that gets a lot of the little stuff wrong, but gets all the important stuff right. So don't be put off by my pedantic musings over details, because the grand sweep of this game is superb, even if they don't have a clue how combat knives and key binding works. So how well did they port this game over from PlayStation to PC? Well, the key binding is a fucking joke. It's a typical console port affair where they didn't get enough griping pedants like myself to test it out properly before release. For nearly every keybind, if you use a certain key for anything, you can't bind it to something else. This is Magnus retardation in extremis. Why do I need 4 contextual interact keys if I am only going to use one specific keybind in one specific context? Why can't I rebind that key to something else too? It's almost as bad as a Ubisoft game. In Battlefield, imagine if they didn't let you use the same movement keys in a tank that you use in a helicopter. That would be silly, yes? Because they are keys that you will only use in that specific context. Well, that's what you have here for nearly every key. I eventually figured out a relatively comfortable setup that didn't give me repetitive strain injury or a fucking aneurysm. But as always, I found myself musing over the fact that so many badly configured video game interfaces require you to have multiple interact keys, even though you never need to use them at the same time and on the same thing. One of life's little unsolved mysteries, I guess. The difficulty settings are golden, and I mean that. Right out of the gate, you can set the game up to be a light version where you can soak up the story and admire the mountain views, all the way beyond hard to scaled survival modes. Top shelf for this kind of openish world survivalish game. Easy, normal, hard. Hard level 2, survival, survival level 2. Good work. This game has some shocks in store on normal difficulty, so fuck knows how brutal some of it is on survival level 2. Something I'm going to find out the hard way, I guess. The game feels very console-y, if you know what I mean. It's subtle, but any PC gamer will know what I'm talking about. Sometimes movement, looting and other in-game movement related mechanics are organised around the principles of how they will work when used by someone navigating the game world using 2 thumbsticks. When it's ported to PC, the legacy of these myriad small design choices live on like a ghost in the machine. You can't really describe it, but you can feel it in nearly everything you do. Like how you can't escape out of the survival wheel, you need to repress the button that opened it. Like you can't escape out of the game tips, you have to use E. On a console there is no escape button, so someone assigned that function to a literal button. When the game is ported over, the same philosophy persisted. Because, you know, it never occurred to anyone apparently that in PC games you can just fucking slap hammer escape to back out of menus, options and backpacks as a hardwired muscle memory reflex reaction. This shit is stuff that needs to be polished out by having a bit more testing by PC gamers rather than developers who are too close to the game because they've been working on it for 4 years. 6 years if you go back to the very conceptual start of development. Like I said, it's subtle, and I'm not making a judgment about playing on console. I played Red Dead Redemption 2 to death on console with relatively few side effects, only moderate brain damage, and some of my PC friends still return my calls. But just like Red Dead Redemption 2 on PC, it keeps reminding me that this game was built from the ground up for PlayStation. Oh, but not the mouse scaling for binoculars. That's not subtle at all. That's balked. It's like your arms have seized up once you look down the binos. It's fucking ridiculous. From a functionality perspective, this is a fairly typical direct, unsophisticated, low-rent console port to PC, with all the associated nonsense, like weird checkpoints that override your save points, and item selection wheels that only make complete sense if you are playing on a controller. However, I would reluctantly admit that everything that did piss me off with the game, I could eventually fix, and everything that I couldn't seem to fix didn't piss me off enough to ruin the experience. Field of view, bike steering sensitivity, audio spikes. I could fix all of that. The FPS was locked at 60, so I didn't need to fix that. So yeah, it felt very much like playing a console game on PC, but it certainly worked a lot better than Red Dead Redemption 2 did at launch. Because at launch, Red Dead Redemption 2 was a fucking train wreck on PC. I do, however, take issue with the button mashing. Button mashing is fine on a console controller because, you know, they are specifically designed for being mashed. Porting this precise mechanic over to mouse and keyboard is supremely annoying. I paid a lot of money for my keyboard, so I'm not particularly keen on fist fucking it into my desk for the sake of one grappling encounter or cutscene. Rapidly mashing on a button situated on a controller that you are clasping in your hand is one thing. Mechanically, that is very different from pounding downwards onto a keyboard positioned on a solid hard surface. Please stop doing this with ports. Any button mashing should be assigned to the mouse one button, thank you very much. Overall though, the game ran fine for me. Sure, I got the odd micro stutter, but straight out of the box on an average PC, it ran better than any Ubisoft game published in the last decade. And certainly better than Heartland ever will. The odd hang-up when the game was loading location data, one time an encounter slightly wigged out when I ambushed the bikers waiting to ambush me, and two of them teleported straight to their bikes, which was an obvious scripting error, but overall it ran as smoothly as honey dribbling down Jessica Alba's back on a hot sunny day. But having to press F to fix my bike, or R to refuel it, then press return for no reason at all, and then hit escape to back out of the screen, that kind of multi-button pressing nonsense, that shit screams ported from PlayStation, and we didn't really think about the consequences too hard. Refueling and fixing my bike should not require 6 different button presses. The docile fuck mechanic only needs to do 2 things. How did this get organised so it required 6 button presses? And it's the first fucking screen! This is the ergonomic equivalent of an outsourced overseas automated telephone help centre where you spend 20 minutes trying to get someone from technical support to help you, only to finally speak to someone, who then tells you that you need to dial a different number. So what about the story? You play the part of some stanky, aggressive, unwashed, miserable, sweaty, oil-stained, grumbling bastard. It's basically like me, only this skank can actually ride a vehicle with only 2 wheels without falling off and crying. The world has gone to rat shit because of a plague that turns people into mindless, aggressive, vicious, homicidal, zombie-type creatures. They aren't actually real zombies, despite their violent and nonsensical behaviour. You know, they're just like those people in Seattle. Once infected, people degenerate into shuffling walkers who want to snack on you, and the shit-the-bed scary part is that when they spot you, they stop shuffling, turn into Usain fucking Bolt, come sprinting straight for you, and really want to snack on you. You are trying to stay alive in a broken world, come to terms with the loss of your wife, whilst trying to help out your bestie biker buddy Boozer, a guy with exceptional head tattoos, and an uncanny ability for automatically making the worst possible life choice whenever any set of options are presented to him. "Hey Boozer, that wound looks infected. Here's some medicine which I guess you will refuse to take because you are Boozer." That kind of dynamic. Days Gone is basically a console-ported, openish world, post-apocalyptical, survivalish game. It's like The Last of Us 2, only in this game all the characters are not complete arseholes. Nobody is shoveling woke politics up into your grill, and you actually maintain some level of faith in humanity, despite the grim reality of your daily existence. Unlike in The Last of Us 2, where frankly, if I had found a nuke, I would have detonated that motherfucker and put everyone out of their misery. The main character Deacon has a solid story and was actually a rather likeable rogue. He's a good man who has seen more than his fair share of troubles, even by post-apocalyptical standards. His pre-apocalyptical existence was fairly troubled, long before society officially collapsed. He is trying to exist in a world where being the worst version of yourself is frequently rewarded, sensible, encouraged, and tempting. He has lost the love of his life, who is filthy hot by the way. The world has gone to hell in a handbasket, and every day is a struggle to stay off someone's buffet menu, where there doesn't seem to be much point to surviving anyway. Despite the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune being hurled at him, at his core, Deacon is still a good bloke, and despite his best efforts to suppress that part of himself, his good nature keeps shining through the cracks of his nihilistic facade. His affection for his bestie, fellow biker Boozer, and his forlorn longing for his lost wife thread their way through his journey, serving to remind you what kind of guy Deacon is at his core. He's a bit grumpy, short-tempered, and capable of ultra-violence levels of hardcore carnage. But despite his penchant for spontaneous bloodbaths and a casual habit of inserting himself into bandit camps and mercilessly slitting everyone's throats, like he's an impatient slaughterhouse worker eager to clock out so he can start his weekend, he is nevertheless, essentially, a decent guy. He's enough of an arsehole to survive in this world, but nice enough that he deserves to live long enough to live in the world that comes afterwards. Lisa, his wife, was a well-acted and voiced role. His wife, incidentally, is fit as fuck, and has great tats. The mocap actress playing her is Courtney Draper, who is also similarly charming, but sadly tatless. She's pretty much my idea of a perfect girlfriend. She is an actress, singer, artist, and lawyer. Basically, she's hot, has a stable income, and she could come and bail me out of jail and represent me in court. Looks, money, free legal representation. That is literally the perfect trifecta of qualities for any normal, functional relationship. With me. Incidentally, the actress playing the supporting role of Lisa Jackson is the now famous Laura Bailey, who you will consciously or unconsciously know from her roles in American Dad, Family Guy, Kane in Nier and Nier Replicant, Jaina Proudmoore from World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. Interestingly, Laura Bailey was also a prostitute. Sadly, however, only in the Blade miniseries and not in real life. She has also been involved in some slightly more infamous roles. Barbie, Fashionistas, Space Chimps 2, Zartog Strikes Back, and, worst of all by far, she was Abby from The Last of Us 2. But let's not hold that against her. Let's face it, Neil Druckmann needs to shoulder all the blame for that one. Incidentally, Laura Bailey is the voice artist that received death threats for her involvement in that game. My personal take is that there are some gamers out there that can't separate fiction from reality, and equally, there are some activists out there using Smurf accounts to send death threats to stir up Gamergate hostilities. This was a proven tactic exposed during Gamergate 1.0. Extremophile activists and screeching blue-haired National Socialists got busted whilst pretending to be 16-year-old gamers and sending death threats to feminists. With the Laura Bailey situation, how much of this was which, I guess only the FBI will ever know. But it is worth noting that in previous Gamergate-ish situations, activists have been quick to masquerade as the enemy and launch false flag attacks. Then again, I've had some death threats over video game reviews, so I'm certainly not claiming they were all false. I would also state clearly that no actors, voice artists, or anybody frankly should be receiving any kind of abuse or threats because of creative projects that they have worked on. It makes no sense. And this is a worse crime than any creative choice someone made in a video game. Besides, it's not Laura Bailey's fault she took a job playing a character in a video game that Neil Druckmann fucked up. And if you really hate Neil Druckmann that much for what he did with the franchise and you want vengeance, the best thing you could do is send him a copy of The Last of Us 2. He might actually end up playing it, and I can't think of any punishment worse than that. The weaponry. The guns and weapons in the game were a really mixed bag. They were satisfying to use, felt chunky and authentic, and once you found your favourite, you would quickly come to love it. There were some incredibly arbitrary and unrealistic ammo limits, frankly normal and to be expected with this kind of game. Albeit a bit silly, mind. I thought the almost universal one-shot kill to the head mechanic was great and certainly took a lot of bullet sponginess out of many NPCs in a kind of realistic way. After all, a 9mm pistol doesn't have great stopping power at range, but one round penetrating the skull at any reasonable distance is going to turn the lights out straight away. My issue with the game's arsenal was really one of scaling, accessibility and quality. Perhaps at higher difficulty levels with more ammo paucity and chunkier enemies, what I am about to say may not remain true. But personally my gripe was this. Certain guns were just clearly better than the rest, with many of the guns seeming a bit shit. There were literally some guns that by the time you unlocked them, they were already redundant. You don't seem to progressively work your way up through the shitty, less shitty, reasonable, and then great guns. As a result, I never really got that feeling that each gun had its own merits depending on circumstance and where you were in the game. I didn't get a sense that each gun specialised in a different scenario. The gun scaling was more along the lines of, that shitty AK is shitty, when you unlock that overpowered bullpup, it will be overpowered. Like I said, on survival or survival 2 level, this might be all bullshit, and that kind of player will perhaps scoff at me. But, for my first casual playthrough at least, it went like this. Right at the start, I got the crossbow, by far the best ranged, restockable, cheap, silent stealth weapon, which I realised right off the bat would only ever get put down when I could finally upgrade to the light machine gun. Early game, I unlocked the MWS Bullpup Assault Rifle, and whilst not being perfect, was an awesome close to mid-range automatic rifle that I could just about use at long range with careful tap fire. Early game, I upgraded to the SAP-9 pistol, which was a great sidearm for shooting at other bikes during high-speed pursuits or for kiting bears and wolves from a moving bike. Once I had these 3 weapons in my possession, I quickly identified the only viable replacements, and realised that I would be rolling with these guns until I had max tier unlocks for certain specific overpowered replacements. Sure, I tried out other weapons along the way, but none were better than my meta. Sniper rifles are great, but noisier than a crossbow with limited ammo. The M14 was great, but not as versatile as the NWS Bullpup. I fucking loved the idea of the little stubby shotgun, but it's useless during bike pursuits. You practically have to ride up to the enemy and hold it to the back of their fucking heads. Ultimately, there were lots of guns I would have loved to use for variety reasons alone, but the meta was too pronounced, too stepped, and too bloody clear cut to allow diversity in your approach and combat style. Because I am a masochist, love the apocalypse and like to play games that make me bleed from the nipples, I will be doing a second playthrough on Survival 2, even though it might take me 5 years to complete the game. After that, my opinion might change. But right now it seems like certain weapons are clearly awesome, or shitty, and basically you are just treading water until you replace your shitty weapon with the clearly awesome replacement. The crossbow is an obvious winner early and mid-game, because you can make new bolts for it out of twigs. I like making things out of twigs. A miraculous feat I could not seem to achieve with bullets, however. So whilst being less than ideal as a tactical combat weapon, it was stealthy, and you could keep it gassed up with free ammo. And this utility is not to be underestimated in the apocalypse. Being able to craft ammo for the crossbow essentially gave you a ranged weapon with virtually unlimited ammunition. Not to be sneered at. The melee weapons, I'm afraid to say, were also a bit on the piss. Graphically and gameplay wise, they were a lot of fun. There was variety, and with the right perks, if you found one you really liked, you could repair it on the fly, keep it forever, and even do more melee damage with it with the right perks. I would, however, reluctantly concede that most of them were total shite, and the damage and durability was dumber than dirt. Your combat knife is way too weak. In real life, at point blank range, your average combat knife is more lethal than a 9mm handgun. Not kidding, look it up. 3, 2, 1, most people shot with 9mm handguns will survive if they're still breathing when they arrive at A&E, even if they've been shot multiple times. Stab someone 5 times in the torso with a combat knife and they will likely die from blood loss, even if they get to hospital. The best weapon I found was a buzzsaw blade tied onto the end of a piece of 2x4 with a bit of string. Apparently, in the apocalypse, lumber grade timber and a piece of metal that technically isn't even bladed is now more durable and lethal than a fucking fire axe. That's a 4 to 8 pound lump of sharpened tempered steel firmly secured on the end of America's finest hickory handle. A trained fireman can use an axe to beat and pry through a steel security door, given enough time. Try doing that with a circular saw blade tied onto the sort of cheap wood that your sofa frame is made out of, attached with a fucking bootlace. It's not going to happen. The melee weapons felt great, made nice wig-splitting sounds, and the animations and designs were a brain-bludgeoning delight. But damn, the statistics table for the melee weapons must have been filled in by some rando weeaboo, because damage output seemed to be based more on visual aesthetics than material and physical qualities. Overall, I would say that Days Gone weaponry is more grounded in reality than, say, Wasteland 3 and The Division, but given the genre of the game, they were swinging wildly in a few areas and seemed off the mark. The gun sounds, animations and general feel of the weapons, once you found one that you liked, did however make me forget all of my griping once the bullet cases were flying. So yeah, it's a strange deal with the weapons in Days Gone. I did enjoy the combat. The animations and sound effects were all on point. I guess I just wasn't really feeling much satisfaction by way of progression. Certain weapons are just best. Use them, or you gimp yourself. So what about the general gameplay? I'm sure by now most of you will have a good idea how this game plays. You know the drill. It's a familiar drill, executed very elegantly in this case. You run around the post-apocalyptical woodlands and mountains of Oregon, home of some of the best prepper and survivalist channels on YouTube. You explore, unlock bunkers, overnight camps, and full-on encampments. You do quests, missions, collect stuff and kill freakers. And by completing these chores or turning in the bounty, you increase your trust status and your credit balance with the merchants of said nearby encampments. As you progress through the game, you unlock increasingly better stuff from the shops, in the form of bike upgrades, weapons, supplies and the like. The encampment locals are noticeably nicer to you the higher your trust level climbs. Since petrol is precious, and you have a finite range on your wheels of steel, unlocking said waypoints and supply stops help you navigate the environment more easily, and provides comfy safe spaces to gas up your bike, restock ammo and rest over when it's dark. Curiously though, I have not seen anyone change the bed sheets a single time. Then again, I've never seen Deacon wash either, so there is that. You basically push back on the evils of the world, wiping out nests of freakers and enemy nutjob camp locations, making the area safer and expanding your home range. It's all been done before in other games, but it's done so very well here. I really started to get a feeling of satisfaction after a mission well done, returning to the camp, having less people spit on me or say mean things, and then being offered new goodies and toys in the shops like grenades and shotguns. As you advance, level up and your competence and reputation grows, you start to feel less like the hunted and more like the hunter. Until, of course, you let your guard down for a second, check out the porn on your second monitor, and then a bear decides to suddenly rip your throat out via your arsehole. But the general warm fuzzy feelings of pride and accomplishment are nice while they last. Days Gone is a very curious beast, but at the same time comfortable like old slippers, and most players will find most aspects of the game vaguely familiar. Familiar from other games. Days Gone reminds me of the design philosophy of Ghosts of Tsushima, another game that used lots of well-tested game tropes, but assembled them all together in a very pleasant and coherent way, so that the game felt fresh. Open world survival exploration games are very well trodden ground, so I don't automatically assume that a game has to be 100% original to be good. The important thing is that the whole story, game world and systems work together to create a decent experience, where the player's time and attention seems valued and the overall experience sucks you in, and you don't feel like you're being dicked around, frustrated, or having your time wasted by time-sink busy work and stupid design choices that only exist to extend your playtime or force you to go to some in-game fucking shop. Days Gone is familiar in many ways, but done very well. As soon as I visited Copeland Camp, I thought, this reminds me of the base of operations in Ghost Recon Breakpoint. The Nero checkpoints are a bit like safe houses from The Division. The bike system felt a bit like the horse in Red Dead Redemption 2. Some of the combat, stealth and crafting felt a bit like The Last of Us. And the general dumpster diving foraging is staple stuff of post-apocalyptica. Most of the game felt comfortable and familiar, but it was all bolted together in a way that felt satisfying. The basic open world environment is zombie-ish horde-like. The open world is infested with freakers, who, if alerted by your presence, will be immediately keen on chasing you down and chowing on your face. They drift around here and there and are relatively easy to stealth kill, providing they are few and of low density. And density and few are the keywords here, because if there is a large group close together, suddenly it becomes a 28 days later zombie bum rush. And most critically, in great enough numbers, it becomes a literal and figurative horde. The horde mechanics were shart propelling levels of jump scare and a showpiece within the game. When you snipe a freaker and accidentally pull a few extra, it's tense at first. Eventually you get comfortable with the idea of pulling a small pack of them. But then, a day comes when you shoot a freaker and he doesn't just bring a few mates along with him. He brings 20, and then another 20 start running out of the door next to him, and another 50 start streaming out of a railway car behind him. Then you see more scrambling over the hut in front of you, and suddenly you realise that there are over 100 of these crazy fucks, swarming towards you like a flood. And those are just the ones you have spotted already. This is usually the point early to mid-game where you shit yourself, run to your bike, and practice your tactical running away skills. This is a game where it is immediately obvious that when you arrive somewhere to do a mission or a bit of scouting, you park your bike carefully, pointing straight down the nearest section of clear open road, in case you need to shit your britches, flee, jump on the bike and hit the gas. Being chased down by a World War Z grade horde of brain chompers certainly got my blood pumping. The experience point system is fairly linear. Earn XP, get skill points, unlock Nero injectors at checkpoints to get stats boosts, and you unlock certain recipes from completing certain missions. I kinda missed any obvious learning by doing mechanic. Would be kinda nice if after clubbing 100 fucktards to death I would get a bit of latent skill increase, but overall the character progression system motivated you enough to do stuff, to earn XP, to improve your character's abilities. The perks are fun, but sometimes nonsensical. Generally speaking in video games, weapon properties like ballistics are confined to qualities or mods of the weapon itself or the ammo used. Personal skills and traits are confined to the character's abilities, qualities or strengths. Whilst the perk system gives legitimate utility, they generally range between authentic and nonsense. Butcher. Being able to harvest more meat. That's authentic because that's a skill. Knocked up. Being able to do more damage with a crossbow is really a weapon perk? Two birds, one bullet. Being able to make your weapons magically penetrate an additional target by virtue of your personal character traits is a level of sorcery that Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry would be proud of. Look, I'll be generous and give them the crossbow perk because I guess theoretically someone could perhaps have a high enough level of proficiency and knowledge of crossbows to increase the tension in the string and craft heads for the bolts that do more damage to flesh, like these bad boys. It's a reach, but I'll let that slide. However, when you're hosing down a horde of Portlandians at close to medium range, the trigger of your 240 Bravo light machine gun is permanently finger clamped into the kill them all and let God sort them out position, and your 100 rounds of NATO 7.62 full metal jacket rounds are being stripped off the belt as fast as the gun can ram them into the chamber, sending a non-stop staccato of metal hornets into a crowd of freakers who are all desperately trying to win today's competition to see who can propel the biggest amounts of blood vapour and flesh chunks into the air. I can say with absolute certainty that a perk that increases bullet penetration from one enemy to two enemies makes absolutely no fucking sense at all. Firstly, I don't think being able to place every shot from a fully automatic LMG into precisely the body part that will facilitate over penetration is feasible. Ballistic penetration is a result of ballistics, not personal skill. And lastly, and more importantly, a light machine gun will penetrate multiple targets anyway. It's a fucking light machine gun. You can unwrap one of those puppies on Christmas morning and straight out of the box, you can fire it into a crowd of people and it will merrily go through 1, 2, 3 or maybe even 4 people before the bullet finally grumbles because it has to stop ripping through stupid festive jumpers and end its killing spree. It's a fucking light machine gun. It delights in over-penetration by default. And if you did want a light machine gun to penetrate even more, your only options would be to use hotter, more exotic ammunition or put on a longer barrel or something like that. Not by learning some kind of skill. There's no training course for soldiers where they learn how to make their munitions penetrate targets more effectively by sole virtue of willpower alone. The skills in the game are fun and have direct utility. I'm not questioning that. I'm merely pointing out that they didn't seem to have a very clear delineation of where weapon qualities ended and personal skills started. They just don't seem to understand what is a quality of the material physical world and what is an outcome generated by your character's skills, traits and chosen specialisations. A perfect illustration of this is the perk Iron Grip. Significantly reduces ranged weapon recoil. Nothing reduces the recoil of a ranged weapon. You can reduce felt recoil by sticking it on a vehicle mounting point, installing a muzzle brake, or getting one of those fancy spring-loaded buttstocks that make the gun incidentally feel like it's bouncing around all over the place. But recoil is fucking recoil. This perk should say something like Iron Grip significantly increases your ability to control recoil, because you can't learn to make your gun recoil less, in the same way you can't learn a skill to make a burning match hurt less if you let it burn out between your fingers. You can only learn to squeal slightly less like a girl when it burns, but it will burn you. That's physics. Perhaps I'm being a pedant here, I almost certainly am, but I would note, since the only gun mods in the game are bigger magazines and suppressors made out of oil filters, it's not like they were running out of options for folding the gun perks into the actual guns. And I guess this is a bit of a theme with Days Gone. There is stuff that doesn't really make sense, but you generally give it a hall pass and let them off because you're too busy having fun. You ride a bike that runs out of fuel after a couple of miles. You have skills that change the laws of physics, and many of the weapons in the game are slightly pointless. But, for some reason, they get away with it. Probably because you're too distracted by doing power slides on your motorbike and wig-splitting crazes with your hatchet. The game does have homemade suppressors made out of oil filters, so someone at least clearly watches YouTube gun channels. So kudos for that. The game basically bounces you back and forth between action and the story, which is both bleak and heartening. I thought his best friend Boozer was a genuine rough diamond and the sort of crazy fuck sidekick that you would be grateful for in the non-zombie apocalypse. Similarly, your in-game missus is also a great character, and really hot. In fact, a lot of the characters in the story are decent, distinct and likeable, and when I say likeable, even the unlikable characters are done very well. So you dislike them for the right reasons. You know, that healthy old-fashioned mode of storytelling where there are characters you love and ones that you love to hate. Basically, it's the opposite of The Last of Us 2, where all the characters could annoy the shit out of a sheep from 100 yards away. Even the characters you're supposed to like.
I don't need your fucking help, Joel.
Especially the characters you were supposed to like. If I do have a major criticism of Days Gone, it's that there is no fishing minigame. Setting aside my own love of fishing minigames in video games, given that it's the apocalypse, everyone you meet is griping about being hungry all the time, and the other NPCs actually fish in-game, why can't the player? Oregon apparently has some excellent fishing sites, and I'm fairly sure they're not all hatchery dependent. Not only that, fishing in Days Gone would be hilarious. Seriously guys, what the fuck were you thinking? With the way the freakers, wolves and bears come out of nowhere and bite you in the arse when you least expect it, they really missed a trick here. It could have been the most exciting, perhaps terrifying fishing minigame ever devised. Just saying. Well, that's it for part 1 of my breakdown of Days Gone. In the final instalment of this review, I will be assessing the game's overall merits, scratching my head at how mainstream video game journalism screwed the fucking pooch and let the game down. Let the developers down, let gamers down, and let themselves down. As usual. I will also be discussing how I personally rate Days Gone, and offering up a few humble nuggets of post-apocalyptical advice for anyone who decides to pick this game up based on my now infamously unreliable recommendations. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.
Another bounty.